Hello, and thank you for listening. This is a lecture on the 17th century and the two styles that were prevalent in this century. That is the Cavalier style and the Baroque style. The narrated lectures will be broken down into four sections, two on Cavalier and two on Baroque. So let's start at the beginning of the century, and with Cavalier men. First, a little historical context. The 17th century was the pinnacle of the age of exploration, particularly in Western Europe. Spain, Portugal, England, Holland, the Netherlands, the Italians, the Germans, the French opened up new lands in the Americas and Asia and got really, really rich from it. New territories, new markets for trade. Quickly reached was advances in sailing technology. Ships that could go faster, ships that were bigger than a minivan, which I'm sure everybody appreciated. So we start to see this competition among European powers to exploit these new markets. So we actually have wars breaking out over commerce between nations, vying for those new markets, particularly in America. Asia as well, I can't rule that out, China and areas around there, but North American continent, South American continent were a boon. So here you see in the 17th century we still have some kingdoms, plenty of kingdoms, but we're already starting to see the rise of nations and nation states. The big ones are England, Czech, France, Czech, and the Low Countries, which basically is in this area. Low because they're lower than sea level. But that's for another time. Two we're going to talk about real quick, France and England. These are our biggest fashion influencers of the moment. Two powerful monarchs in France of the Bourbon dynasty, or if we want to be more correct, Bourbon. First was Louis XIII, ruling from 1610 to 1643, aided by Cardinal Richelieu, and then Louis XIV, ruling from 1643 to 1715. He was, I think, just a teenager, maybe even less, when he took the throne. As you can see, he ruled for almost 70 years. He was the Sun King, the epitome of the absolute enlightened despot, a taste setter not just for France, but for Europe as a whole. England's timeline, a little more tumultuous. Okay, Elizabeth I died in 1603 without issue, so the throne went to her Catholic cousin. Up in Scotland, James I did okay. Charles I ruled until 1648, didn't do as well, was beheaded for being, quote, the author of all our ills, unquote. Then we have the Commonwealth that Cromwell ruled until 1658, which was a Puritan tyranny, really. After Cromwell died, the English decided they had enough of that nonsense, and they restored the monarchy under Charles II, hence the name the Restoration. And then one last Catholic monarch, James II, and then England said, sorry, I think we like being Protestants instead. So they invited some Dutch people over, William and Mary, in the glorious Revolution of 1688. Glorious because there was no bloodshed. Now, Louis XIV, what he did, under Louis XIV, France became a major trendsetter in fashion for the Western world, and it has been that way ever since. Before, it was kind of a little bit of a backwater, but under Louis XIV, they made a concerted effort to be the leader in the arts and science and fashion, and they have not relinquished that to this day. So Paris Fashion Show is always the biggest draw in the Western fashion world. Two terms in the 17th centuries that apply to art, music, and fashion of the period are Baroque and Rococo. Baroque is Old French for irregular. So before we had these sort of classical, linear, rectilinear lines, Baroque is characterized by curvilinear lines, more naturalistic, more emotional intensity, stylized, dramatic forms of grandiosity. As you can see is the example on the upper right there. And incidentally, Baroque styles coincide with the rise of a form of building material, plaster of Paris. Because of plaster, we now get these, we're breaking free from the rectilinear neoclassical forms, classical, Greek classical forms, which were dictated by stone, marble, that sort of thing. Now we have plaster, so we can do these very curvilinear, very grandiose sorts of decoration. Rococo, from the French rocaille, is sort of a precious form of Baroque. Very intricate shellwork decoration, very delicate, as you can see on the lower right there. That commode, I think, if you will. Maybe a table commode. You can see just how precious and curvilinear and just very detailed. That is Rococo. In terms of costume history, we're breaking it down into 3 eras: Cavalier, Baroque, and Rococo. Now, Rococo we will cover in the 18th century because it overlaps. So in the 17th century, we're focusing on the Cavalier and the Baroque. Quick look at some fashion innovations. Most people wore broadcloth, but there was a thriving market materials catering to the well-to-do mercantile class and the aristocracy. We have silk coming in from China and Italy. We also have new advances in printing and painting on cotton with intricate designs. The Low Countries in England have cornered the wool market. Wool in England will be king, mercantile king, for several, well, at least the next couple of centuries. Also, this is a new interesting innovation, the first fashion publication, fashion plates, engravings, showing appropriate modes of dress, particularly in Paris. The Bonnard family is responsible for numerous publications that survive to this day, an invaluable asset, research asset. You see on the right 2 engravings by Henri Bonnard, how men are supposed to dress in day and evening. We also see articles and essays devoted to cutting, sewing, pattern making, so forth, also published in Paris. One of the most influential, Benoit Boulet's L'Atelier Senseret. I hope I am doing that right. It describes the most efficient methods for cutting women's garments. So there we are. We start to see this come. We'll see more and more engravings from these publications as this class goes on. The best source that we have for clothes of the period come from paintings. This is an era of sumptuous full-figure portraits, particularly upper class, mercantile, businessmen and businesswomen. They want to show as much detail how wealthy they are, how beautiful their clothes are. So portrait painters became very good at portraying them. Here we see one, Rubens and his wife, by Peter Paul Rubens, a renowned painter of the day, and you can just see the shine on the fabric. Even on the stockings, you can see are made from silk because of that sheen. So just very detailed. Van Dyck, Van Ryn, Vermeer, all of these are excellent sources for costume history. So let's start with the Cavalier Fashion. With these 2 young lads, you remember trunk hose, still worn, puffier, more padded, right? Under these were worn these are called upper breeches called canyons. So we have trunk hose, canyon, and then your knit hose. Kind of carrying on from the Tudor era, as you see. Now we have this basic undergarment, still the chemise in Italy, but now we're moving westward, westward towards France and England. So guess what? We can call this a shirt now, particularly in England. You can see it's like a nightshirt. This was commonly worn, made of linen, lace cuffs, standing collar on some of them. Working class shirts had a falling collar and a V-neck that laced up the front. So you can see in the upper corner here, this is a stiff collar, high collar, that will be more upper class. And then down here where the arrow is, that's a working class with the falling band collar. Look for this to come up in more fashionable clothes in a little bit. Shirts were at least knee length or longer. So for underwear, this would be what you would wear. You put it on in the morning and you'd wear it all day and all night. You might wear it the next day. Once it starts a little gamey, you throw it out and put on another one. This will become paper later on, possibly. Okay. Jacket's no longer worn. The doublet is king here. It is a close-fitting garment with detachable matching sleeves, as shown in this picture. Also could be worn sleeveless to allow the shirt sleeves to be seen, so they better look good. usually starched cotton cuffs edged with lace. And then we're going to see this new. This is going to be more and more prevalent, even to this day, the peplum, which is basically an extension below the waist of any kind of shirt or blouse. You can see here, these are tied on. These little ties, these little points there. So there's that, and then, of course, the trunk hose. Now, attached to the shirt sometimes, or even to the doublet, is a new type of collar called the whisk collar. You can see this, sort of a standing starched collar. Then you'll have your doublet. Then you might have separate sleeves, and to kind of cover the edges of those sleeves, you'll have these shoulder wings known as epaulettes, usually decorated on the edge with gimping. Now, gimping is the term that will be read. This is it. This is kind of this edging here. You see this? Those lines, that's gimping. Not part of the fabric per se, but so on. And just to confuse you anymore, trunk hose is starting to be called slops. They're kind of breeches, but they're kind of very wide at the bottom, kind of like skirts. These are Spanish slops, which means these are high. So you don't have the canyons, you don't have those breeches, right? You just have these trousers called Spanish slops, Spanish because they fit above the knee. They were popular in Spain. And then hose. Here's some more slops. Dutch slops go below the knee. Venetian slops go below the knee. And you can see they're basically some kind of bag with two holes for your legs to go through, and that's about it. It's hard to really even call them pants. And then if you look, this is where I'm putting my peplum. Peplum. Other things you want to know about? Sure, let's talk about collars. The following whisk collar over a doublet. Here he has a very wide peplum. Here are some paned slops. On both pictures, you can see the slops are paned. Canyons. This man here has some canyons with garters on them. And then rosettes, lace shoe rosettes, lace flowers. On the right, we have the falling ruff collar. Also, we have painting everywhere. Doublets, shirt sleeves. There, slops. The man loves painting. Okay, very important too, riding boots gaining popularity. So before this, people would ride. They had to. Horses. What do you ride horses for? To get from point A to point B. Still, that's going on, but there is also more fashionable riding in the country. There's a little bit more free time, so you can ride for pleasure. So when you do that, you want to have good-looking riding boots. You want soft, supple leather. That would be high riding boots that would be turned down like a sock. So you can see these very fashionable, very high riding boots there, up to mid-thigh. And then when you get in the city, you can pull them down, like it's shown at lower right. Up in the country, down in the city, as they say. Now, all this will be adopted by the Cavalier, the French cavalry, which became sort of popular figure even before Alexander Dumas' Three Musketeers there. And they had this sort of style that they were just over it and above it all there. So they're going to dress. They're going to take these styles and they're going to make it their own. And then people are going to say, that's freaking cool. You really are a Kardashian. You know that, don't you? And they're going to copy it in everyday wear. So let's look at what Cavaliers are wearing. Here you see they got their doublets. They're looser. Kind of open them up at the peplum level because screw that, we're Cavaliers. Over this you see a falling band collar, right? Remember the shirt, the working shirt collar that was kind of down like this? It was kind of adapted by the Cavaliers. The sole at your shoulder, you're wearing a gorget or gorget of leather or metal, just like the knights of old. Now, the doublet was often open in the back and slashed to show the shirt underneath. We'll show that in a second. Slops. Slops are not good for riding around. This is cavalry. Remember, this is French cavalry there. And also musketeers. They would also shoot rifles, but they rode a lot. So slops really aren't good for that. So we're just going to abandon those, and we're going to extend those canyons, and now we can call them breeches. Okay. The garters. replaced by lace or ribbon decorations, right down here, called cannons, so called because they look like the bloom of gunpowder when a cannon goes off. And then most characteristic of the period, if you say this is what I want to show this is a Cavalier period, Musketeer period, is the bucket top boots, which is basically these boots. These are high riding boots, and they're kind of slouchy, kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Rive gauche, is that right? Where they just can't be bothered, and they just kind of flop down to make this bucket top. Excuse me. Here we see a rear view. So we see the closures of the doublet and the breeches. You can see how they just go up the side, up the back of that, and they're kind of left open. Just kind of slouch down, do a few buttons, and out for the day. And then points casually dangling. They're casually. So you tied some of the points to the breeches, the rest. Okay, I think we'll stop here before we run out of time. Thank you for listening. Part B will continue with a few more notes on men and Cavalier women.